What's going down, everybody? I'm Rob G, your host for today. Thank you for bearing with us while we got the live issues sorted out early. This show is all about our production lenses that we use at Optimum Films Inc. And we use each of these lenses in one way or another through one of our projects or another. So we have lenses that we use specifically for documentary work, lenses that we use for narrative work, and lenses that we use in a lot of commercial stuff. First off, a little bit about myself. I am the owner of Optimum Films, and I get paid to do videography. I am not a professional cinematographer, though. So please take all of this as just being my opinion. Your criteria for what you judge a lens on may be a little bit different than mine, but I appreciate if you guys are experts in the field, if you are Olympus experts or if you're vintage lens experts, please either hit me up and let me know what I got wrong, or even better, make a video yourself, because I was looking everywhere for these type of videos before I decided to make one. I just decided to make one because I couldn't find one. A lot of these lenses up here are lenses that I love, and I bought them blind basically because I couldn't find any information about them. So the more that we can talk about these lenses, the more they'll become appreciated, maybe the more they'll be appreciating, and then I can actually make some money off of these things. What do you think? All right, so with enough ado, I think I'm about ready to get into the very first lens on the table, the OM 24mm F2. Now, this is our widest OM prime. It is a professional prime from the OM series, and I love this lens. I think it does a fantastic job of rendering color and contrast. I have enjoyed the experience of really just having to think with more of the picture in frame. We shoot it at about a 35mm length, which is great in a lot of interview settings that I've used it in before. I've used it to cut in between with some of my more modern lenses, and I think that it works really well at that. Here is a look at the back element there. See that back element, still a pretty good size for a wide angle, but you can tell that there is a lot of glass in there. It's a very well-made lens. Now, all of our lenses have been cinemodded, if you like that term. We started by unifying all the front threads to a 67mm front thread, because our matte box has a 67mm thread plate. And I think that was great. It saved us tons of time. We've also 3D printed these focus gears for when we are using a follow focus, or even when you're not using a follow focus. If you use a matte box, or you use like some kind of a big hood, getting in there on the focus gear can be kind of tough sometimes. At least for me, like even these have really great rubber on the outsides that has like a really good grip to it, but it's just small, and so when you gotta get your fingers in there, even when I got little teeny fingers like mine, it does take a little bit more to do. So I would just say absolutely 3D print yourself the gears if you plan on using them for film, and if you plan on using any OM lens for film. So next up on the tour, we are at the 35mm F2. First off, let me go back to this and tell you real quick about pricing on the 24mm. 24mm is not a cheap lens. It's about $660 some for the lens that you see on the screen there. We have spent probably close to that to get this lens that we have in front of us. You can find cheaper versions, but you're probably not going to like what you have to compromise to get that deal. So yeah, definitely I would say if you're trying to start investing in OM lens, that's probably not the lens that you want to start with. This one, however, is a much better starter lens if you're looking to get into a professional prime for a little less money. This is the 35mm F2, and all Olympus lenses come in two flavors or at least most OM lenses come in two flavors. The early versions were called the silver nose because they have a little chrome ring around the focus or around the front filter. But also, you have the later versions which have just a black ring, and those ones I'm not sure whether they're just specifically known as the MC or if they're just known as the black nose. Whatever. I've heard both versions on forums and threads. But this one is really nice. It's soft in all of the right ways. I think a lot of lenses that you think of as being soft are like mushy soft. This is a very delicate sort of powdery soft. I like the way that it renders light and color as well, just like all of the OM lenses. This one has the tendency to be able to swirl a little bit if you point it at a bunch of point light sources. If you look at the rear element, it's much smaller than the rear element on the 24 millimeter. And, you know, I think, you know, like there's just not as much engineering that goes into this lens, and it was much more mass produced, much more widely bought. So it's not rare, but I love the older version. I love the newer version more than I like the older version. Pricing on that, if you're looking for good ones, probably going to be somewhere around the $180 range for like a old silver nose. You're probably looking around paying $200 to mid 200s for a later model black MC version. So next on the list, we have our first 1.2 prime, the 55 millimeter 1.2. Now this one is a silver nose version because it's a very old version. I did not know that they made a black nose version until actually just today. Somebody pointed it out to me. Thank you for that. But really, this lens is kind of wild. I really like the way that this flares and the way that it takes the background and completely pushes it away. It's hard to nail focus on though, and there are definitely ways that you can make a lot of mistakes with this lens, particularly when you backlight with it. So it's definitely not as controlled. I love though that it is built with just like big chunks of glass all through it. You know, like it is a very well made lens. Radioactive, so you see that there's a little bit of that yellow tint in the lens there. But, you know, for those of you that don't know, that's not a bad thing. It's not going to kill you. It's just you got to color correct it out. So prices on this, they're kind of all over the place. Like this lens is all over the place. I have seen good versions of it going for high 200s to mid 300s. But mint versions can be up around 4, mid 4. So, yeah. It's a good lens to own, but it's more of an art lens, and it's definitely not going to be your first foray into OM lenses. This next one, though, is an absolute stunner. So this is the 50 millimeter 1.2. This is the descendant, the younger brother of the 55 millimeter 1.2. And you can tell that they just took everything that people were probably saying about the 55 millimeter, and they decided that, hey, we'll address that in the 50 millimeter version because it's a lot cleaner. Now, I haven't had as much chance to shoot with this lens as I have the 55 millimeter, but I have enjoyed the little bit that I've done because you find out that the swirl in this is much more controllable while you focus wide open. You can actually, this one's manageable in terms of shooting it wide open and having a moving subject, whereas I would say this other one, the 55, is just, it's tough as heck to nail a moving target subject in focus with that one. But all of these lenses, one thing that you should know is that they all get much sharper the moment that you stop them down. I mean, even the very first stop, so F2 on the 1.2s, is dramatically sharper when you look at it in lens charts, and we will do that in a future date. Now, the thing that you're going to find in terms of price on these is that they used to be expensive, but now they're kind of a bargain. Matter of fact, this lens that is currently on the screen is such a good deal at $450, When I started looking for this lens last summer, there were people offering mint condition lenses for $900. Like, what has gone on with the 1.2 market out there? It's insane. So definitely there's more of these copies out there now. I think maybe more collectors have been looted, but get your hands on one now, because they are a fantastic lens. And if you like a standard lens, and actually for us it's kind of telephoto because we're shooting on micro four thirds, so there's a little bit of a crop there, but it's a no-brainer in terms of a buy. And the next no-brainer in terms of a buy that I would say we have is this guy right here, the 75 to 150 millimeter f4. And this might be the lens that started it all for us. We shot a short film about 8 years ago on OM lenses. We had this lens and a 50 millimeter 1.8, and we shot it on a dummy adapter. And to tell you the truth, even though shooting on a dummy adapter doesn't make any lens look really good, to be honest with you, on micro four thirds that is, this lens looks amazing when we shot it on a dummy adapter. And I would say as far as it goes when it comes to color rendering and sharpness, for a cheap zoom, this has got to be leading that pack. I mean, it's only $29 online, but you can definitely find some good use out of this. Now, I think that it's probably going to be a lens that we don't use as much as we use the other lenses, and that's primarily because when you focus this one, the barrel spins, and that messes with the matte box. And so there's ways that we can get around that. We could, put the matte box on rails, but we shoot a lot of run and gun, so using supports and things like that is probably about the limit of things that I want to do with like rigging something up. So on to the next part. We were talking about this being micro four thirds and how shooting with a crop is kind of a difficult thing in general. And I definitely think when we started, we were shooting on this dummy adapter. This is a Photo Deox, just plain Jane micro four thirds or OM to micro four thirds adapter. It's just a metal piece of tubing. And what that does is that allows you to shoot with the lens, but you go right down the center of the lens. Like, you cut out all of the edge of the lens, and you really only get that part which they say is the sharpest. But when you're shooting in a vintage lens, certainly if you're shooting wide open or anywhere close to that, the halation on these lenses, I think, expands a little bit when you're shooting at a crop. And so that can kind of make the image look hazy, like mushy almost. And so when I decided that I wanted to really get into shooting OMs for video and using them professionally, there was absolutely no other choice but to use a speed booster. And I was very happy to find out that Metabones makes an OM to MFT speed booster. And it really does the great jobs of just kind of squeezing that image down onto our sensor size, and that gives you the character. All of the great character that's in these vintage lenses is kind of in that corner, and you don't get that when you're just shooting down the middle. So using more of the glass, using more of the elements, by being able to actually squeeze more of that frame onto your sensor size is a necessity when you're using these lenses, I would have to say. And I can't speak to many other vintage sets out there, but certainly the OM set, it is vastly superior when you use a speed booster. All right, out of OMs, we are now moving on to the 4/3 lenses, or what I like to call OG 4.3. This is the Lumix 25mm D Summilux, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with its younger brother, the DG Summilux, which is native to micro four thirds. Something you might need to know about micro four thirds is that it was based on the 4/3 system. This lens is beautiful at rendering color and contrast, and we use it in professional work all the time. It is it stands up. It's a lens that was made in 2002, and it stands up with lenses that were made just 4 or 5 years ago. I think it's a brilliant piece of kit, and it doesn't really work on our lens unless we adapt, or on our camera unless we adapt it. So we need the Olympus Mm F2. That's this guy right here. It's a smart adapter, but I haven't found that it helps very much with the talking to the camera. So it's got those gold contacts in there, but it doesn't really do a great job of making the autofocus very fast or anything. You're still going to sacrifice that. The image quality is really where this stands out. Prices on this thing, you're probably looking at paying mid 200s, low 300s. That's the sweet spot. Any lower than that's probably got some issues. Any higher than that, somebody is overpricing it. I honestly think that this thing is great. 4/3 lenses are almost all focused by wire from what I've seen, and that's not desirable for a lot of filmmakers, but I think what you gain in image quality from this, and it also has some interesting quirks, like when you shoot it with the GH5, all of the sudden this aperture ring becomes active. So when you use it on Panasonic stuff, you can actually use it in full manual mode. Very cool lens, very cool system. Next in the system, we have this 35mm macro lens that is an f3.5. And again, we've had this lens since we owned our very first micro 4/3 camera, the Olympus EPL1. And we have used it as a standard lens and a portrait lens, and I've liked using it in those, but I also have loved using it as a macro lens, because when you shoot up close in macro, this thing really throws the background out of focus. And it even at 3.5, if you ever shot 3.5 on a macro, you know that's fairly wide open. I find myself even stopping this down quite a bit on a regular occasion, but it's just a little itty bitty piece of glass in the front, little itty bitty piece of glass in the back. Not the most well built lens out there. I mean, it's plastic, so you're probably not going to invest a whole lot in it because of that. You're looking at maybe less than $100 to get a good version, a little bit around $100, closer to $100 to get like a brand new version. So yeah, it's a good lens. Into the lenses that we use natively on micro 4/3, which actually isn't a lot, but currently we're shooting on our Panasonic 35-100 up here on the overhead cam, and we're using our 12-35 on the A cam. And those are great lenses, but there's nothing special about them. And we have lens tests on our channel with those lenses specifically if you haven't seen them before, but they're dime a dozen lenses, so I'm pretty sure you have. This lens, on the other hand, I think people, you see reviews on it from time to time, but I'm not sure people appreciate this lens as much as they should. The 45mm f1.2 Pro. This is a gorgeous lens. Like, check out the glass in this thing. I mean, this is a really well-made lens. You can tell that they spent a lot of time engineering it, but you also can just feel the quality of it in the weight of it. So we use this for interviews primarily, and I love using this for getting in close with anything really, because it's so the image is so clean. We actually end up having to diffuse it a little bit sometimes because it gets overly sharp. But it's good to start with too sharp and go backward rather than too soft, because you really can't put the sharpness into it. So this is the most expensive lens we have on the table right now, and I do not suggest that you go buy anything from Amazon, but if you're so inclined to buy from Amazon, you can get it brand new for around $1,000. Use the good market on this is probably around $850. but we paid $900 for it, and I've never looked back. I felt really good about it. So the last little itty bitty lens, literally little itty bitty lens that we want to talk about is our SLR Magic 8mm ultra wide angle. This is an f4 lens. I love that this lens is actually useful. I kind of bought it because it was really inexpensive, thinking that we would never get a chance to use it. But you'd be surprised how many times that you get put into a little teeny area and they want you to film corner to corner. And you can't do that on a 50mm or even a 35mm. You're gonna feel like that you're getting things cut out. And we have a 24mm focal length in the 12 to 35 that is good, but still sometimes you just need that little bit of extra width, and this does a fantastic job of getting that out there. Price wise, you're looking at spending about $100 on it. Excuse me. Brand new, it is maybe a little over $100, but to be honest with you, so cheap. I really couldn't see the reason in you not owning one if you had a micro 4/3 system. You will just be amazed at how many times you can pull it out of the bag. Speaking of bags and cases, you know, we don't really carry all of this stuff around just out like this. So we carry a lot of it around in these individual barrel cases. It's kind of our belief around here that if you are gonna leave lenses out, they're going to get broken, so we always put them back in these things. Maybe we'll invest in a Pelican case later, but I still like the idea of being able to pick and choose which lenses are right for a project and then bring those accordingly instead of having a case that's made up for the whole thing and then you lose the whole case, and gosh, that would be awful. So this one though, this is kind of cute. I love this. This is our original 35mm, or sorry, our original 75. GH5's having trouble focusing on this. This is our original 75 to 150mm vintage case. I thought it was going to be for a joke because I never thought that this would actually fit. But yeah, with the lens cap on, 67mm, bang, in there. So yeah, it's a good investment, and it's kind of cool to be able to show up when I bring that with something that's a little bit vintage. We talked about matte boxes for a brief second earlier, and our matte box is the PolarPro Basecamp matte box. When you get into matte boxes as a beginner, I think I was certainly just like daunted by how many different choices there were out there. And you know, you can spend a couple $1,000s on a matte box, or you can spend a couple $100 on a matte box, but the amount of change that you get, the amount of options and performance that comes out of that money is kind of staggering. And so we ended up going with the PolarPro Basecamp because it is extra light and we can use it in a run and gun scenario, but we could also take advantage of the fact that it has a native variable ND system, which I have loved the hell out of since we've started using it. It takes two lenses to be able to work the variable ND filter, and the magic is that you use this circular polarizer, and there's a little knob on the matte box that turns this circular polarizer, and as the polarization increases, it changes the ND strength on the filter. So we have two of the variable ND filters, the 2 to 5 and the 6 to 9. To be honest with you, the 2 to 5 is the more usable version. I think I've used this a lot more, but if you're going to be shooting in very bright sunlight, think about no clouds in the sky, and you want to still be able to have access to the lower apertures, this 6 to 9 is fantastic. All of these variable ND filters come with this tab that makes it so you don't have to grip the edges, and if you look at it, you can see it's just a really dark smoked piece of glass, but it's really well made. So I do recommend that. so last on the tour, and if you've made it this far, congratulations. We didn't expect that you would, but we have probably some lower cost options for people who are not looking to get into the matte box. We have a circular polarizer circular ND filter, variable ND filter from Thai Photo. This is, for all intents and purposes, what people would call a cheap ND filter, but it has a really cool trick up its sleeve that's very professional: hard stops. You don't see that in very many ND filters that are circular, let alone cheap ND filters. So that was a nice surprise. Now, if you want, it does shift the color on things a little tint to green, so you got to color balance that out. And if you don't want to deal with that, we use a Tiffin circular variable ND filter, but this one costs 3 times as much as the Thai Photo, and it doesn't have hard stops. So sometimes, you know, you figure, are you weighing like getting the nasty X pattern, or are you gonna do a little bit of post-production cleanup? But yeah, it's, you know, they're actually pretty comparable, which I was surprised about. Then last but not least, the diffusion I was telling you about that we use when we are working with the Olympus and the Leica lens is the Black Pro Mist, and we use quarter stop diffusion right now. And the reason why that is because I think really like it's the sweet spot for these lenses with how sharp they are. It takes the highlights and it rolls them off a little bit more naturally, makes the contrast a little bit less harsh, and I think that it really is the sweet spot. Now, when you're shooting into a really strong backlight, probably 8th stop is a better way to go. But you know, it's a set that we're building, so we plan on showing you a lot more of these videos in the future if you like them. Trust me, again, I hope that people take some of this information and go buy some of these lenses and make these videos themselves, because I know that there's probably more qualified people out there than me to do it. But if you do like it, we are going to be doing individual reviews on each one of them, as well as comparisons to other systems, and in the case of the 50 and the 55, we'll be doing a comparison heads up. So look for that in the future. You can find more information about us, Optimum Films Inc., at OptimumFilms.com. That site is undergoing some changes and will be different very soon, but we'd love for you to go there and take a look at us and see if there's any way we can help you with your video solutions. I want to give a big shout out to Sid, who has helped me today with the switching and making all of the buttons work. If you want to talk to either of us and ask any of us a question, you can get in touch with us on our Twitter at Optimum Films Inc. And the last shout out I'd like to give is to Mark Holz for being like an amazing guru of the vintage lens scene. He really changed the way that vintage lens reviews are done, and I look forward to really trying to bring my own spin to that. But like, let's continue to make lens reviews that are exciting and engaging. So thank you for the inspiration, Mark. All right, well, thank you for your time, guys. We hope that this has been something informative, or that you've learned something. And until the next video, that's the Wham Bam Cam Fam. Peace.